Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight, gun laws, abortion access, and religion. We cover the big cases in the upcoming SCOTUS term.
Thousands of renters could lose their homes as the state's eviction moratorium comes to an end. We hear how city services could help those in need.
The White Sox have made it to the playoff and their fans are rallying. I'm Amanda Vinicky. I'll be live from outside Guaranteed Rate Field.
Sox fans will see home playoff baseball.
Plus, we're talking to the man that built the team, one-on-one with White Sox GM Rick Hahn on playoff baseball coming to the South Side.
The University of Illinois posts its largest ever endowment return. That and more from Cranes.
New MacArthur Fellow Jacqueline Stewart on her pioneering work highlighting black filmmakers.
And after nearly 20 years, Navy Pier is parting with Crystal Gardens. Meet a woman fighting to save it. But first, some of today's top stories. Mayor Lori Lightfoot is criticizing the state's attorney's office today for what she calls failing to bring charges in a shooting incident from Friday.
We can't live in a world where there's no accountability. When there's no accountability, meaning individuals who wreak havoc, who fire indiscriminately, or fire at a target but without any regard to the sanctity of life and the health and well-being of others, if they do not feel like the criminal justice system is going to hold them accountable, we're going to see a level of brazenness that will send this city into chaos.
Now, the shooting happened on the west side and killed one person while injuring 3 others. The mayor, a former federal prosecutor herself, says she believes there's enough evidence for charges for someone involved in that shooting and has sent a letter to state's attorney Kim Foxx. Now, Fox's office responded this evening saying CPD detectives and her office agreed that they would not be able to approve charges based on the evidence they had, acknowledging a chaotic crime scene. In a statement, her office says, quote, "The facts the mayor presented today simply are not in line with what was presented to us by CPD and not borne out by the evidence we received. The staggering violence that is devastating our communities is horrific. However, we must still adhere to both our ethical and legal standards in evaluating charges. As a former prosecutor, she knows that," referring to the mayor there. President Biden's postponed trip to Chicago is back on. The White House says the president will be in town Thursday to promote his vaccine mandate for large businesses. The trip was originally scheduled for last week, but canceled as negotiations were still underway over his economic recovery agenda, which remains stalled in Congress. And people with disabilities who work with state vendors could be getting a pay raise. Today, Governor J.B. Pritzker signed an executive order requiring state agencies only enter into contracts with vendors who've agreed to pay employees with disabilities at least the minimum wage.
Wage increase will not cost any employee their job. As we move forward, the state will work with its vendors to ensure that they have the tools they need to continue providing people with disabilities an opportunity to engage in meaningful work with standard pay.
And the state says workers with disabilities earn just 87 cents for every dollar earned by people without disabilities. Up next, White Sox fans rally on the South Side ahead of this week's first round of the playoffs. We have a live report outside Guaranteed Rate Field, so stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Baseball season may be over for the Cubs, but White Sox fans hope they've got a while longer to cheer on their team. They got started this afternoon with a rally outside Guaranteed Rate Field. Amanda Vinicky joins us now from the site of this pre-playoff event. Amanda, what's happening over there?
Well, Brandis, it was a party this afternoon outside Guaranteed Rate Field. I'm sorry to say that you've missed the party by now. It just ended at 7, but this Change the Game rally had a lot for fans. Get their pictures taken with the Sox mascot, Southpaw. You could snack on beefs and pizza, dance along to a DJ, get your picture taken also with a bobblehead, a giant bobblehead player, and you could compete in a quiz to win some White Sox merch. Everybody who entered also also got a Change the Game banner and a poster of the American League Central Division Championship team. Now, I did meet a bunch of fans waiting in line for some of those activities, including Ozzy Chavez, who grew up watching Sox games with his dad and his uncle. His given name isn't actually Ozzy, but his uncle started calling him that in '05 when the Sox won the World Series, and it stuck. It's what he goes by now.
As a fanatic, it's really fun, don't get me wrong. It's so much fun when you're inside that stadium. You feel that energy, you feel that positivity on that vibe. You can meet new people, so on and so forth. And this is the South Side. We all come here as a community. We all come here to have some fun at this game.
Now, the Sox have built this team for years and brought in some former Cubs players along the way, which makes things, you know, a little bit of crosstown fun. They won the American League Central Division, will play 2 games in Houston starting Thursday before heading back to Chicago Sunday. The Sox made the playoffs last year, too, but because of COVID, fans could only watch on TV. Even those who don't have tickets to Sunday's game say the opportunity to actually attend games in person this year is something they didn't take for granted, and players shouldn't either. Now, this is a team that won the Field of Dreams game, and fans say that it is not a stretch to dream that the Sox will win big this year.
Let's go all the way and win this thing.
We're ride or die White Sox fans.
I think we have the probability we can win the World Series.
I think they're going to do great.
What they say, cream always rises to the top, and we full of cream over here on the south side of Chicago.
You got to stand next to your team. Being the South Sider here, you got to have loyalty, and that's what we have for this team right here.
How good is this team?
This team can go all the way.
They're at a crescendo, but I didn't feel that way in 2005 either. So we'll see. I'm always fairly pessimistic about it just because I love it so much that I hate losing, actually probably more than I like winning. So I'm always not that confident, but I'm excited. First time we've been able to go to a playoff game in 13 years. So
there's only one team in Chicago. It's 35th and Shields right here.
Now, the Sox last won the World Series in 2005 and then had to, of course, stand by and watch as the Cubs brought home the title in 2016. Now, this is the year they hope to bring it back to the South Side. Now, again, the Sox playing in Houston for a couple of games, but for returning on Sunday, well, they'll be playing right here at 35th and Bill Veeck Drive. You hear that enthusiasm, do you, Brandis? With a whole lot of cheers. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Amanda. Clearly some excited fans out there today. And later in the program, we'll talk with White Sox General Manager Rick Hahn about the upcoming playoffs and more. But first, to Paris shuts and a highly anticipated Supreme Court term. Paris.
That's right, Brandis. The Supreme Court returned to in-person today for the first time since March 2020, with the exception of Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who joined by phone after testing positive for COVID. Now, the court's new term is full of high-profile cases, including hot-button issues like abortion access, Second Amendment rights, and religion. And joining us to talk about some of those big cases and how things have changed on the court over the last year and a half are Julie M.K. Siegel, a partner at Kirkland & Ellis and a former clerk to Chief Justice John Roberts. Aziz Huq, a professor at the University of Chicago Law School who clerked for former Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Matthew Hellman, a partner at Jenner & Block, who co-chair of its appellate and Supreme Court practice. He clerked for former Justice David Souter. Welcome all of you to Chicago tonight. Julie, I'll start with you. This is the first time, as we mentioned, that justices have been back in person for hearings since March of 2020. How has COVID changed oral arguments and how justices have interacted with these cases?
Well, one big change during COVID when the court was holding arguments over the phone was the way that the justices asked questions. So in the courtroom, they're used to asking questions in whatever order they want, often interrupting each other and the advocates. That wasn't really possible over the phone, so they tried out a much more orderly method of going in order of seniority, asking questions one at a time. And now that they're back in the courtroom, we're seeing an experiment with a little bit of a hybrid model. So for the majority of the argument, the justices are asking questions at will, and then at the end, there's more of a round robin format where they each have a chance to ask any final questions, again, in order of seniority. And one exciting thing we saw today was that Justice Thomas actually started off the questioning for the term. And that's noteworthy because before COVID, Justice Thomas went most arguments without asking any questions at all. And then he became more active during the phone arguments, and today indicated that he might remain active even though they're back to the courtroom.
I was just going to say, Justice Thomas had been silent for years until COVID when he started asking questions via the phone arguments. All right, Matthew, we mentioned so many high-profile issues in this term. Do you anticipate big, sweeping decisions on these issues that involve abortion rights, separation of church and state, gun rights, or do you anticipate more narrow rulings on these cases?
Well, that's really the question that a lot of people have been wondering. And I think it's useful to take a step back and look at where the court has been and maybe where it's going. For those of us who remember clerking, say, for Justice Souter, during that time on the court, it was often said that Justice O'Connor and Justice Kennedy were the swing justices. I don't think they necessarily enjoyed that term, but that's what sometimes people said, because on 5-4 cases, the ones that were close, they were often the justices that were in the majority. After Justice O'Connor retired, Justice Kennedy really had that mantle. And then when Justice Kennedy retired, it was the Chief Justice Roberts, who I think was most often in the majority. I think something like 97% of the time, 2 years ago, he was in the majority in cases. Now the center justice on the court has moved a little bit, I think further still towards maybe where Justice Kavanaugh might be. And whether that will lead to broader sweeping opinions, I think is hard to know, but there are more ways to get to a broader opinion with the current composition of the court.
It certainly seems to be more of a 6-3 conservative majority, whereas, as you mentioned, in the past there was 5-4, where Justice Roberts, who is judicially conservative, would kind of be the swing vote on a lot of those cases. Aziz Huq, let's talk about a case that's getting a lot of attention, and that's the state of Mississippi's ban on abortion after 15 weeks. That is being challenged. What are the implications of a decision here for Roe v. Wade?
So Roe v. Wade, which is a case from the early 1970s, and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which is a case from the early 1990s, together protect a woman's right to an abortion after up until the point that a fetus is viable. It's generally considered that viability occurs around 24 weeks. The state of Mississippi has passed a statute that prohibits categorically, with a few relatively narrow exceptions, prohibits categorically abortion after 15 weeks rather than 24 weeks. In doing this, the state of Mississippi is purposefully challenging not just the framework for analyzing abortion rights under Roe and Casey. It's really challenging the idea that the 14th Amendment to the Constitution protects abortion rights at all. So looking at Mississippi's brief in this case, which is called Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Clinic, Mississippi essentially doesn't try and argue the merits of its law under Roe or Casey. Its entire brief is focused upon the idea that Roe was wrongly decided. So that's the issue that Mississippi is trying to tee up. If the justices endorse Mississippi's position, obviously that will have sweeping legal implications, at least outside Texas, where SB 8 has already de facto prohibited abortion. And so we're likely to see a lot of anti-abortion criminal statutes kicked back in.
Julie, as Aziz is saying here, that this legal strategy is striking at the way the 73 Roe v. Wade law was decided. Does that mean there's a potential ruling here that would overturn Roe v. Wade?
Well, that's certainly what the state is asking for. I would note that one sort of interesting feature of this case is that the state's strategy seems to have shifted from the time it was asking the Supreme Court to hear the case to the merits stage briefing. So as Aziz was saying, the briefs now argue explicitly that the court should overrule Roe versus Wade. But when they were asking the court to review the case, they told the court that they didn't have to overrule any precedent in order to decide the case. So there's a little bit of an interesting dynamic there with the change in strategy, and we'll have to see how the court reacts to that.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to follow. Matthew, another case getting a lot of attention, a Second Amendment case out of New York State. Explain this case and the ramifications here.
Sure. So the case is about whether or not New York can justify restrictions on carrying concealed handguns outside the home, concealed carried licenses, and what it takes to get one of those licenses in New York. But what's really going on from the court's perspective is, at this point, quite a few years back, more than 10 years ago, the court issued a major Second Amendment decision regarding DC gun laws and struck them down under the Second Amendment. And since that time, there has not been a big substantive Second Amendment case. And some members of the court have expressed dissatisfaction with that in opinions dissenting from the court's decision not to take those cases, saying the Bill of Rights has the Second Amendment, it has the First Amendment. We take First Amendment cases all the time. We should work out what the Second Amendment requires as well. The court hadn't taken one of those cases until recently, and that case went away for other reasons. But now they've taken this case out of New York about concealed permits, and what it will determine, or what it could determine, is how good a rationale the state needs to have to prevent someone from carrying a concealed weapon outside the home.
And we'll see what the ramifications of that would be, not only in New York but across the country. Aziz Huq, I want to kind of zoom out a little bit. You know, all these decisions are coming as trust in the court, or at least in the court's impartiality, or being a non-political actor, has eroded. You've got justices like Alito trying to defend the court, Coney Barrett out there making public statements defending the impartiality of the court. To what extent is this perception and this distrust earned right now?
I think it's very hard to call the court an institution that is impermeable, that is outside of politics. We've seen in particular in the nomination context, fights that are plainly partisan in nature over judicial appointments. And what we're seeing in both the abortion and the guns case is the immediate consequence of replacing Justice Ginsburg with Justice Barrett. So the fact is that the court and the country are divided over questions of constitutional rights and constitutional meaning in ways that track partisan lines. So I think it's better not to blame the court, and better to think about the court in the context of a country that is increasingly polarized along DR lines, and where Democrats and Republicans have very different views of abortion, gun rights, religious liberty, LGBTQ rights, and the like.
And certainly the nomination and confirmation processes the last several years have been incredibly politically charged. Julie Siegel, as we mentioned at the top, you clerked for Chief Justice Roberts. It's pretty evident that this legacy of the court has weighed on him. His ruling in the Obamacare case several years ago was a bit of a surprise, but seemed to indicate his belief in incrementalism on the court. So how does this perception right now weigh on the way he might steer this court?
Well, one question is whether he is still at the center of the court, and it seems like maybe he's not. So we'll have to see how the court handles these really big hot button issues this year to see whether he is able to put together coalitions for more incremental decisions, or whether the court has an appetite to make more sweeping, broader rulings this year.
And as Matthew mentioned, it seems like Kavanaugh might be more toward where the center of the court is at this point. And Matthew, there's another very heated case dealing with the separation of church and state coming out of Maine. Explain this case for us.
Sure. Well, this is a follow-on to a case that the court decided recently coming out of Montana, and it deals with when a state can decide that money it provides to educational institutions can or cannot be spent in religious institutions. Or, I think as this case deals specifically, religious institutions or institutions affiliated with religion that have religious instruction as a core component of what it is that they teach. And in the Montana case that preceded this one, the court held that Montana couldn't limit its funding just to secular schools. It had to allow funding for scholarships and the like for religious schools. And this next case out of Maine is the next step forward, because they left open in the Montana case what happens if it's not just a religious school or a school affiliated with a religious institution, but one where there's a religious education.
All right, so many high-profile cases to cover, and our thanks to Julie M.K. Siegel, Aziz Huck, and Matthew Hellman. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. It's a stressful time for anyone behind on the rent. The Illinois moratorium on evictions officially ended yesterday. That could mean thousands of Chicagoans could be facing eviction and foreclosure. And according to a recent U.S. Census Bureau survey, more than 60,000 Illinoisans say they're likely to face eviction in the next 2 months. Joining us to share information about what services are available for those in need are Chicago Department of Housing Commissioner Marisa Novara and Michelle Gilbert, Legal Director at the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. Thanks to both of you, and welcome back to Chicago Tonight. Commissioner Novara, let's start with you, please. So Illinois' eviction moratorium, we know, ended yesterday. What resources are available to renters who are served eviction notices?
Yes, thanks, Brandis. There are three main messages we want to get across to renters. One is do not self-evict. Only a Cook County sheriff can evict you. So even if a landlord has served you an eviction notice, it does not mean you need to move out right away, especially if you don't have a safe place to go. The second thing is that there is free legal help available. You can go to rentervention.com or chicago.gov/eviction. And the third thing is that there also is financial help available. And there's more on that at chicago.gov/renthelp. So three things: do not self-evict, there is free legal help, and there is financial help available.
What requirements are do need to be met for rental assistance?
So under the current guidelines, the first round of rental assistance program that we received from late 2020 legislation, people need to be able to show that they had a COVID-related impact to their ability to pay rent. They need to be under 80% of the area median income, and we just need to see that documentation. And under these guidelines, renters and landlords actually both need to apply. If we don't hear from a landlord, we will make 3 efforts to reach them. And if we can't make a match, at that point, we will proceed with payment directly to the tenant.
And Michelle Gilbert, we just heard from Commissioner Novara, you know, some advice for folks who might be facing eviction. What do you all tell people who might be in danger of being evicted from their homes?
Well, definitely, if someone gets a summons to go to eviction court, they should go to court. I know that going to court is scary if that's not something you've done before, but the resources are available right there in the Zoom courtroom. So court is by Zoom. If a tenant gets that summons and they don't use Zoom, then they can go to a common area in the Daily Center. It's socially distanced. Someone from the judge's staff can help them get onto Zoom. If anyone that had ever been to eviction court before, it was the past practice that first court date was a trial. And the Cook County courts, working with the Cook County government, the city, and a consortium of legal aid agencies have made some changes in those practices. That first court date is not a trial. It's a date where someone can ask to be assigned to the early resolution program, and that's either a landlord or a tenant who can't afford an attorney. And they're going to get sent right into a Zoom room where they consult with an attorney for free.
Okay. Commissioner Navarro, some estimates say that more than 60,000 Illinoisans expect eviction in the next couple of months. What has the city seen? Have you all received a large number of inquiries?
Well, the truth is it's very hard to know. We know that in other localities around the country whose moratoriums have ended earlier than ours, they have actually not seen a spike in evictions. We did have a prediction earlier this year by the Lawyers Committee, actually, that approximately 20,000 households might be at risk of eviction in the city of Chicago proper. But that was before both the city and the state began distributing emergency rental assistance program dollars. And so we have been able to assist almost 5,500 households since we began. The state has more than matched that. So we don't yet know the exact impact of those resources. Our hope, of course, is that the point was for it to stabilize people and keep them in their homes and get the money flowing to their landlords who may be needing the funds as well. The other truth here is that we are able with these funds to pay ahead in advance 3 months. And landlords, when they agree to take the funds, also agree that they cannot evict for another 90 days after their last payment. So what that effectively means is that we're looking out 6 months if for someone who's getting this assistance. And so it could be that if someone has not been able to be stabilized and able to pick up their rent by that point, that we might be seeing evictions later down the line and not as much of a rush right now. We just aren't sure yet.
Okay. Michelle, your nonprofit focuses on representing low-income renters. Which communities are the most likely to be impacted by a moratorium ending?
Well, there's no question that communities of color are the ones that are hardest hit by eviction generally. Our eviction data bank analyzes Chicago eviction records. We know that the South Shore community, the Austin community have very high rates of eviction. So it's very important to us to outreach to those communities and to let them know that we're available to help.
And Michelle, what are you hearing from clients about the strain that the pandemic has had placed on their livelihood and their living conditions?
I mean, it's been very difficult. People, we're seeing tenants who are still not back to work, or maybe they're back part-time. They're still worried. We definitely have had an uptick in calls. Sadly, we also see landlords who are engaging in what illegal eviction practices, locking people out. And of course, it's a much better way to go to apply for rental assistance. I mean, we know that it's been tough on landlords and tenants, and that's why the rental assistance is here. It's to support the housing community generally.
Okay, and that's where we'll leave it. Our thanks to Housing Commissioner Marisa Navarro and Michelle Gilbert for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandis.
Up next, the fight to save Navy Pier's Crystal Gardens. Stay with us.
I come from a people that not only found a way to survive through the most horrific circumstances, but they thrived.
I could not save one of the boys of color in my own life. If my family could be exposed to this horror, then really it could happen to anyone. We are truly all in this together.
Navy Pier is saying goodbye to Crystal Gardens and welcoming a 3D virtual reality experience. Chicago Tonight's Joanna Hernandez meets with a woman who is on a mission to save the popular attraction.
If you have ever visited Navy Pier, then you have probably stumbled across Crystal Gardens. Once you walk in, you can't help but be captivated by all the natural beauty.
Geez, you can hardly find a place like this anywhere else in the city. You know, you walk in here, it's calm, it's peaceful. You got these fountains, these trees.
Celine Wasgala was hoping Crystal Gardens would be the place where she and her fiancé would get married. After making some calls, she found out the garden was set to close.
I went straight to my computer and started looking into it. I found some news articles that a new zoning ordinance was going through the Chicago Planning Commission to rezone this area as a commercial area, which was for the Illuminarium.
The free 1-acre indoor garden is being replaced by a 3D immersive experience called Illuminarium.
I understand COVID-19 has been a really tough time. I'm sure Navy Pier could use the revenue. I think it's a little ironic that I've read articles about the CEO of Illuminarium. He's quoted saying that he's trying to democratize extraordinary experiences. What's more democratic than a free green space for everybody?
Crystal Gardens has been inside Navy Pier for nearly 20 years. For some, it's a hidden treasure, and the thought of losing this place may come to a surprise to many.
I suggest they can build safari somewhere else, but this place should be here.
Wild, a safari experience, is set to be Illuminarium's first show. According to the entertainment company, it will virtually transport participants to Africa.
They should keep it the way it is because the virtual safari experience, I'm sure they're going to charge. And this space that anybody can walk in and it's free.
Navy Pier temporarily shut down last year as it struggled during the pandemic. A spokesperson told us revamping the Crystal Garden has been part of their plan since 2016.
It just doesn't click for me. I would love for Navy Pier to find another space to put Illuminarium. I know that the IMAX theaters just closed, unfortunately. That could be a great space for it.
Wasgala is now leading an effort to save the free garden by starting an Instagram account. Wasgala says dozens of people started sending her pictures and memories they had of the garden. A petition has now generated more than 20,000 signatures.
I had someone who works here in Navy Pier reach out to me and tell me, hey, I think that's a great idea. I hear about people who are on their way to the Ferris wheel, on their way to other end of the pier, and they just happen on this place and they're just amazed.
Illuminarium plans to invest more than $30 million in the redevelopment of the Crystal Garden space, a plan Navy Pier is backing. A spokesperson also telling us the project was fully vetted by city officials, and they also say they have invested in new green spaces throughout the pier. However, Wasgala still has hope that with enough support, Navy Pier will change Illuminarium's location.
I think this place should continue to exist and continue to be a space for happy memories for years to come.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
And construction is expected to begin in mid-2022, with Illuminarium opening its doors the following year. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, electric car maker Rivian details a major loss in its IPO paperwork. That and more from Cranes. Playoffs begin for the White Sox on Thursday. We hear from General Manager Rick Hahn about the postseason and more. And film scholar Jacqueline Stewart on her pioneering work highlighting black filmmakers and how it got her noticed by the MacArthur Foundation. But first, some more of today's top stories. An update on Chicago's controversial gang database. Chicago police say the new rendition of its database is not ready for prime time just yet. This more than 2.5 years after an inspector general's audit deemed the current one deeply flawed. Police Superintendent David Brown appeared before a city council committee today for hearings on the department's proposed $1.9 billion budget. CPD previously told city council the new system would be up and running by September. And as we mentioned, that April 2019 audit by the Inspector General Joseph Ferguson determined the city's gang databases were, quote, deeply flawed collection of gang data with poor quality controls and inadequate protections for procedural rights. Rare public statements today from Illinois' wealthiest resident, and he directed some of his harshest words toward Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. During an event today at the Economic Club of Chicago, Citadel CEO Ken Griffin, seen here on the left, criticized what he sees as broken schools, bankrupt pensions, and a declining tax base in Illinois. Griffin says he asked Governor Pritzker to deploy the National Guard during unrest in 2020, but he says Pritzker refused. Indeed, Pritzker did, in fact, call up the Guard then at the request of Mayor Lightfoot. Griffin compared Chicago crime to, quote, Afghanistan on a good day, and says Governor Pritzker hasn't done enough to tackle it.
It is a disgrace that our governor will not insert himself into the challenge of addressing crime in our city. We have our work cut out for us because we have a government in our state that continually puts votes in front of people, votes in front of lives, votes in front of schools, and we need to start to take the state back inch by inch from people that put their politics first and put our people second.
And a spokesperson for Governor Pritzker responded today calling Griffin a, quote, liar, and saying that Griffin has, quote, actively worked to dismantle the vital ecosystems of social services that prevent violence. Griffin and Pritzker have long been at odds. Griffin was the primary funder of a campaign to defeat the progressive income tax amendment in Illinois, which had been one of Pritzker's key priorities. Facebook and Instagram are apparently back up and running for many users this evening after being shut down for much of the day. Facebook confirmed that it experienced a worldwide outage on all of its platforms, including Instagram and WhatsApp. The massive tech and social media company hasn't said what caused the outage or when service will be completely restored. And this comes a day ahead of expected testimony on Capitol Hill from a Facebook whistleblower who claims that the company routinely has put profits ahead of regulating hate and disinformation on its platforms. And now back to Brandis for some of today's top business headlines. Brandis.
Paris, thank you. The University of Illinois posts a record-breaking endowment return. One of the largest tenants in the former John Hancock Center is leaving, and electric pickup maker Rivian, backed by Amazon, reveals a net loss of nearly $1 billion in its IPO paperwork. Here to go behind the headlines is Crane Chicago business editor Ann Dwyer. Welcome back, Ann. So, U of I's endowment has seen years of poor performance, but the close of fiscal year 2021 brought its endowment to a record $3.8 billion. How did that happen?
Well, mainly they're riding the updrafts in the stock market that have lifted so many portfolios nationwide. You know, U of I doesn't have as much of its investment money riding on venture capital and private equity as some other schools do. And in fact, I think their returns might have been even better this year if they had. But having said that, the university's smart investments in its stock portfolio, bonds, and other types of investments, coupled with a major fundraising campaign, as well as an infusion of federal cash in the wake of the pandemic, seem to have all combined to lift the school's financial fortunes, at least for right now. And the school is saying that they're looking to try to duplicate those efforts in the coming years.
So the former John Hancock Center's largest tenant, SMS Assist, has announced that it's moving out. Where is it headed, and why is this a significant move?
Well, they're heading to Prudential Plaza, and that's significant because the building recently lost its major tenant, the Chicago Tribune, and SMS will now be Prud Plaza's largest tenant. But more broadly, this move, Brandis, signals there's still some tenant interest in the East Loop at a time when all the momentum in the downtown office market seems to be inexorably marching west. Just today, we got word that the PR giant Edelman is abandoning its longtime headquarters at the Aon Center right next door to Prud Plaza. And where are they going? They're going west to Canal Street, just west of the river. So that's just part of that longtime march that seems to be happening in the loop toward the West Loop and Fulton Market.
Okay, we'll see what happens there. And lastly, electric truck maker Rivian says it lost nearly $1 billion in the first half of the year at a time when the market for electric vehicles is so hot. What's going on there?
Well, a growth plan as ambitious as Rivian's is bound to cost big bucks, and that's really what's happening right now. You know, Rivian is just now starting to roll product off its assembly line in downstate Normal. But in the meantime, they've got a lot of building and infrastructure to put in place. They are in the process of building out service centers in several states, including Illinois, as well as a nationwide network of charging stations to service these vehicles. And, you know, that said, backers like Amazon and Ford Motor Company don't seem to be scared off by $1 billion burn rate at Rivian right now. In fact, the same filing that disclosed this loss also gave a lot more details about Amazon's deal with Rivian. They are standing to receive, for 4 years, exclusive rights to Rivian's delivery vehicles, and that's all going to help Amazon to meet its own carbon neutral goals.
$1 billion, not scared off. Wow. Ann Dwyer, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. As you heard from Amanda Vinicky earlier in the program, Sox fans are brimming with excitement as the team heads into its playoff matchup with Houston starting this Thursday. This year is a culmination of a 5-year-long rebuild that saw dozens of strategic trades, draft choices, and free agent signings. And joining us now is the chief architect of that rebuild and this current White Sox roster, General Manager Rick Hahn. Rick Hahn, thanks for being back here in Chicago tonight. Congratulations on the AL Central title.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me again.
All right, so how satisfying is it to you to see this team that you've rebuilt win the division and have a shot here at winning it all?
You know, it's exciting. Obviously, we made the playoffs last year, but we weren't quite where we felt we needed to be from a roster standpoint to really make a lot of noise deep into the postseason, whereas this year we feel like we're on the precipice of potentially something fairly special. Obviously, we're at a point now from a health standpoint that we're very optimistic about where our players are at. And we view this as the start of potentially a nice extended period in White Sox baseball where we make this an annual appearance.
Absolutely. I know that was the focus of your rebuild, putting together a consistent winner. One of the biggest and most controversial offseason moves was the hire of 77-year-old manager Tony La Russa, who hadn't coached or hadn't managed since 2011. Your assessment of the job he's done with this team to this point?
Obviously, we're all thrilled with where we sit right now. Our early conversations with Jerry Reinsdorf and Kenny Williams leading up to the hiring of Tony, it was about putting ourselves in the best position to win a championship. Obviously, the proof will be in the pudding over the course of the next month or so, but the way we've been able to overcome a fair amount of adversity over the course of this season and find ourselves positioned here on the doorstep of the postseason in a very strong position is in large part a testament to Tony and the coaching staff and what they've been able to do from an environmental standpoint in that clubhouse, despite the adversity over the course of our summer.
And you mentioned the adversity, and you're getting healthy again. You lost Luis Robert. You lost Eloy Jimenez. A lot of injuries. Do you attribute any one overarching thing to the injuries, or these were just freak occurrences, and now they're back?
Yeah, I wish there was a magic bullet that we could point to, because obviously early on, we figured that out. We would have made some sort of adjustment. Unfortunately, a lot of soft tissue injuries throughout baseball this year. There was some speculation that perhaps it was related to going from 60 games back to 162, but so many of ours happened early in the season that really fatigue or whatever increased workload probably shouldn't have factored into that. So it has been unfortunate, but for knock on wood, we find ourselves today in a fairly strong position as we enter the postseason with most everybody back to full strength and in a position to compete come October.
One of those key pieces, Carlos Rodon, who had some arm issues. What's his status for the playoffs?
We remain optimistic that Carlos will contribute in a meaningful way here over the next few weeks. Obviously, he was spectacular for the first several months of the season, and it's also not completely unforeseen, given his innings load over the last few years being relatively limited, that as we got deeper into the season that we were going to have to protect him a little bit more and give him more rest and attention. Carlos has been great in terms of adapting his program. Our trainers and our pitching coach staff has been very creative in terms of getting him through the finish line. And now over the next few days, hopefully we're able to put him in a good position to succeed against Houston come next week.
You mentioned jumping from 60 games to a full 162 games. Do you think that might be behind La Russa's decision to rest a lot of players, a lot of games this year? I know that was a source of frustration for a lot of fans that, want to see, those big superstars in there every game.
Sure, and you hear the term load management more associated with the NBA, but it is a real consideration the more that we learn about what athletes need in terms of keeping them at their peak level. We were fortunate that we were able to build a fairly comfortable lead early in the season with regards to the division, which gave us the flexibility to protect some guys and rest some guys, especially down the stretch. The overarching goal has always been to win a championship, and part of that was giving the guys the proper workload as they entered this final month of the season. They're hopefully able to sprint through the finish line thanks to how they've been handled over the last 6 months.
We mentioned all the work you and your staff have done over the last 5 years in trades, trading away some veterans for a lot of these younger pieces. You were still wheeling and dealing this year. You traded away Nick Madrigal, which a lot of Sox fans were excited about, to get Craig Kimbrell from the Cubs and Ryan Tepera. What do you say to the fans that might wonder if that trade was worth it, that getting rid of that prospect paid off?
You know, it's a tough thing when you go through a rebuild and you get to the point where it is time to win, because we've all grown attached to many of these young players. We've known them since the time they were drafted. They've obviously been promoted throughout White Sox Nation. In this day and age, you're able to follow them more closely through their minor league journeys. So it's only understandable that people get attached to some of our young guys. In the end, that trade was very much about putting ourselves in the best position to win a championship this year. We'll see how the next few weeks play out in terms of whether the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak, there. But we were able to acquire a guy in Craig who, has been a World Series champion, has put together a Hall of Fame career at the back end of the bullpen, and we think it's going to be a real asset for us over the next few weeks.
Absolutely, long considered one of the best closers in the game. Other White Sox fans have also wondered about the offense, especially with Luis Robert and Eloy Jimenez getting healthy and getting hot. But there have been some overall offensive inconsistencies. What's the key against the Astros offensively?
You know what? I think with regards to the offense against any team, it's about being healthy. We've really gotten to the point, or I feel like, as I said, we are entering this postseason healthy really for the first time over the course of most of the season. I think we've had our projected top six in our lineup together less than a dozen times. So when we're all together, when it's the way that we anticipated this thing from an offensive standpoint when we drew it up, we're a pretty tough unit to deal with, and I think we're going to bring that mentality to Houston. And although we're facing a very strong team and a team that has been tested repeatedly in October, we like the way we match up and think it's going to be a real good series.
Yeah, and speaking of Houston Astros, for those that haven't had a chance to watch a lot of them, give us the scouting report. What are the things that stand out about this Astros team?
They are a dynamic offense, veterans throughout who have been to October, who have been to the mountaintop, a strong pitching staff, especially in the starting rotation, and a solid defense. Obviously, they're headed up by Dusty Baker and a coaching staff that has extensive October experience. So they're going to be a challenge. The fact is that a couple of really good teams in the American League didn't even make the playoffs. They got eliminated yesterday in Toronto and Seattle. So we knew no matter who we faced this month, we were going to be challenged. Starting off with a team that has essentially put together an extended October run in successive years, what we aspire to be, I think is a good first step for us here. And although it's going to be a challenge, we look forward to it.
All right, it's an exciting series to come starting Thursday afternoon. And Rick Hahn, once again, congratulations, and thanks as always for being here with us.
Absolutely, appreciate you having me.
You bet. And up next, we hear from a Chicago-based genius. But first, we take a look at the weather.
She grew up in Hyde Park and was recently named a genius. That is, a fellow of the MacArthur Foundation. Jacqueline Stewart is a film scholar, archivist, and curator. And she's being honored for, quote, ensuring that the contributions of overlooked Black filmmakers and communities of spectators have a place in the public imagination. And Jacqueline Stewart joins us now from Los Angeles, where she is the Chief Artistic and Programming Officer at the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures, which just opened last week. And we're going to come back to that in a second. Jacqueline Stewart, welcome back to Chicago tonight, and congratulations.
Thank you, and thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So the museum opened on Thursday. What was that day like for you?
Ooh, well, it was the fulfillment of a lot of hard work. The teams at the museum have been, as you can imagine, working around the clock to ensure that we could open with strong programming and amazing exhibitions. So it was the end of a very exhausting period, but also incredibly exciting. And now just seeing people, especially families, coming through the doors and enjoying what we're presenting is just phenomenal.
And when did you get the call about the MacArthur Fellowship?
I got the call a few weeks before the public announcement was made, and I couldn't believe it then. And I have to say, even today, I'm still pretty shocked by this news and incredibly honored.
So tell us about some of the work that has gotten you noticed for this honor. What can we learn from studying early Black cinema?
Yeah, well, you know, I grew up in Chicago, as you said, and I got my PhD at the University of Chicago. And when I began my graduate studies, it was at a time when film studies was really becoming formalized at the university. And so I was really interested in the Chicago roots of film history. And I was especially interested in Black film history in Chicago. So I did a lot of research on the silent era and filmmakers like Oscar Micheaux, who was a pioneer in making Black cast films for segregated Black audiences. And this is a key prehistory for anything else that we would need to know about the development of Black filmmakers. These are the pioneers who really laid the groundwork for people like Spike Lee and Dee Reese and Ava DuVernay and all the filmmakers who have had careers in contemporary times.
So we've also covered the South Side Home Movie Project here on Chicago Tonight. Why is that a point of interest for you as far as research goes?
Yeah, well, so much of film scholarship has focused on commercial filmmaking, mainstream filmmaking, narrative filmmaking, but by far, the vast majority of films that have been made have not been those kinds of films, but amateur films and training films and educational films. So for me, studying the home movie making of people on the South Side of Chicago was a way of kind of correcting the record where film studies is concerned. And then as a native South Sider, I just was really curious. I wanted to see what kinds of things people shot when they had cameras in their own hands. And it turns out that home movies are a remarkable archive of everyday life on the South Side, and buildings that no longer stand, and businesses, and they activate memories, public memories that I think are so valuable, especially to counteract the really detrimental negative media representation of the South Side.
You, as we mentioned, you grew up in Hyde Park. What role does Chicago play in your interest in film and in, you know, sort of your intellectual development?
Yeah, well, a huge role. I mean, I feel like I grew up in an environment that was so steeped in African-American history and culture and struggle. The importance of telling those stories has always been an important aspect of my scholarly work. I feel really blessed that I was able to come back home for graduate school at the University of Chicago, so I could remain on the South Side and delve into archives, both formal archives, but also the archives that people have in their basements and attics and living rooms. That's where I found that the true Black history really lives. And doing this kind of work in the city that has been so important in the development of the film industry is kind of the pre-Hollywood days have never really been narrated in a way that broader publics understand. And so I guess I've always felt as though it was a responsibility and also a privilege to trace the Chicago roots of filmmaking and Black film culture in particular.
You're also the host of a Turner Classic Movie, of a program on Turner Classic Movies Network where you host an ongoing series on silent films. Do you think silent films are sort of underappreciated by the modern average movie fan?
Sure, yeah. People, I think, have the wrong impression of silent films, mostly because they've been projected in the wrong ways. Like you picture these old movies where people are like speeding around the bases or something at a baseball game. When these films are shown properly, beautiful restorations have been done of silent films, particularly over the last decade, when they're projected in ways that really replicate how they looked originally and at the right speeds. They're incredibly captivating. They are totally, fully realized works of art. And for me, silent films are fascinating because they show us really how cinematic storytelling can thrive. And it's not always in the words that people are saying, but in acting styles and in costume and set design, all the kinds of things that we're really delving into at the Academy Museum. I feel like you get a deeper appreciation sometimes of film craft when you look at silent films.
And before we let you go, Jacqueline, the fellowship comes with a good bit of money, a $625,000 grant paid out over 5 years. Have you had the chance to think about how you'd like to apply that?
No. Been very busy, but actually I have to say this is one of the things that I'm so excited about, that the MacArthur Foundation gives you time. I mean, this is what scholars, what artists, never have. We're always working toward the next thing and, trying to project in our proposals, the timeframes for projects. And this is an invitation to just take a pause and to really think about how to advance your thinking and your work. So I'm really actually making myself take the time to figure that out.
All right, let us know when you figure it out. We look forward to hearing about it then.
Well,
Jacqueline Stewart, congratulations again, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night, live at 7. A new book on the presidential transition finds the January 6th attack was a national security emergency. We talk with one of the authors, Robert Costa.
And we discuss the future of cities, Chicago in particular, in a post-COVID and climate change challenged world. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.
Good grief, Nelly.